I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on January 17th, 2024 at 6 p.m. I am Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. Be reminded that this meeting is being audio and video recorded. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh, I know I did it out of order. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families in the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing students. The next one is the FY25 budget presentation. The presentation tonight will be a little different, unlike in past years when all 5 principals and administrators presented individual requests over the course of 3 nights. This year it will be a single combined proposal.
You missed public comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry. Do you need that language for it?
I think I have it. Sorry, I'm having a little difficulty here. The next item is public comment. Thanks. Members of the community may address the committee for up to 3 minutes longer with the discussion of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the committee who would like to address? Any members of the public that would like to address the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you. So as you already mentioned, Linda, this is a bit different process this year in that we knew we were coming into a very challenging budget season. So the first thing I want to ask is, or note is, you have a single document, 19 pages with all of the original or the initial proposals. In the years past, we've put a binder together. Nicole's put a binder with all the various proposals. There will definitely be multiple documents this year. It's not going to be the regular quantity, but if you do want a binder, let Nicole know, and we can bring that next Wednesday with things ready to go so we can start punching those. Is it a general everyone wants one, or it'll be a smaller binder? But I'm seeing more nods. All right, if you do want a binder, let Nicole know. We're happy to put one together. So again, the flow for this evening, I want to thank the principals, and Greg Kuluk is also out there, our Director of Technology, for being here tonight, and certainly can answer questions if they aren't questions that the 4 of us are able to answer for you. But I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction and then hand it to Kyle to go through the increased costs, and then I will share with you, given the reality of what we're facing, what we're proposing to make for reductions right out of the gate to get to a more reasonable starting point. And then certainly, if you want to ask questions along the way, I think generally that's been the preference, is to ask questions rather than holding questions till the end. So if I'm talking or Kyle's talking or anyone else is talking, please interrupt and we'll just keep asking questions as we go through. So again, I wanted to acknowledge that this is very different than our traditional budget process. Normally we would come in and the 4 of us, along with the other 6 administrators that are in the audience, would present directly to you requests that meet the needs of the students in our schools, our programs, or domains that we work in. We knew coming into this year that we were going to have a very challenging increase in costs. We settled contracts. We have made cognizant decisions that we've been talking about over the past year that we knew would be reflected in this document. And so there were a couple other things that happened that we'll walk through that we didn't predict. And so obviously some of those added additional challenge. But respecting the reality of that, I don't think any of us around the table like this idea of not giving principals, administrators the opportunity to present what the needs are for the various domains. But I think in light of where we're at, we know that level services, what we have today, moving forward with what we have today, is a best case scenario. So we did want to acknowledge and point out that we're operating from if it's not mentioned here, it is assumed to be level services, or I'm sorry, level funded. So pointing anyone who's watching or listening or reviewing the document, it outlines here, link to the website. You can find years worth of budget information. Obviously the FY24 budget in its entirety is there, but also year over year, the requests that principals and administrators have made, and you can see the line by line breakdown and rationale. The budget here tonight doesn't go into that level of detail because it's assumed to be level, each line is level funded unless otherwise noted. And we'll point out some areas where it may be that there's different costs. I think technology, for example, there's areas where a subscription might not be charged in one year and then it rolls into the next year. So that doesn't mean every dollar will be spent exactly the same, but that we're going to figure out a way to make it work with the existing lines. So we've had it broken out in, obviously, personnel is 75% of our overall spend. And so obviously when personnel costs go up, that has a pretty significant impact on the budget. That is one of the major drivers in the budget this year. Utilities and maintenance, Kyle will talk in detail about that. We're making some shifts specifically at this campus as we've seen increased maintenance costs to keep this specific campus operating. Curriculum instruction, it's overall level funded, but there are shifts in the actual spending. Student services, again, that's been an area year over year, obviously, where we talk about increased costs. There are increases in special education out-of-district tuitions and transportation, but otherwise is level. Technology is level. Grant funding, this is a shift in that this is the first year since 21 where we have no federal COVID grants offsetting. So we've received millions, how many, 3 or 4 million over the last 4 years. ESSER 3 is now in fiscal 24, fully spent down. And so that this is the first year where we don't have that funding. That's provided a lot of buffer. I'm thankful. It was very tempting. As you all know, we've talked over the year to add positions. We ended up adding a full-time wellness coordinator and supplemented a math specialist to full-time at the middle school. Those are the only 2 positions that we funded through ESSER. A lot of districts now are having huge $1 million, $1.5 million gaps for ESSER-funded positions. So the proposal here assumes those costs into the budget. School choice, we continue to have back in the early 2000s, we were way out of whack. We fixed that, actually swung in the other direction, had twice as many kids coming in as leaving. We're now a little bit out of whack in that there's more detail further on, but there's actually an increased cost in this budget. And then again, the assumption that at the school level, there are no individual proposals because obviously the majority of the costs at the schools and the district as a whole is personnel. So obviously the personnel costs are carried in the district lines and all other supplies and materials lines are level funded again. And we should point out that this will be the second year, right? Second year. Next year will be the second year that we'll level funding in 2 years with extraordinary inflation. So with that as the context, I don't imagine there are any questions yet. I'm going to ask Kyle to start and kick us off, and we'll tag team starting on page, when it printed off, sorry, I put the numbers too far low, it's page 4, I believe. Or it starts with projected fixed costs for level services. We'll start there.
Thank you. So like Brian describes, the section I'll go over is the cost increases. It's pages, the content is on pages 4 through 12 of the document. There's a lot of really nice narrative here explaining everything in detail, but certainly I'll give the highlights and a little additional context. So starting on page 4, if we could start at, I guess right at the top of the page, the cost increases are separated out into 2 different categories. The first, which you see at the top of the page, is our fixed cost or our level service increases. And then on page 12, I believe it is, will be continuing prior commitments. So that chart right there, personnel increases starting there, certainly go through a little more detail. So items 1 and 2 are going to be our steps and our cost of living adjustments, COLAs, for TRTA Unit A teachers and Unit B instructional assistants. We look, you can see over on the right, $1,044,360 for Unit A, Unit B, $1,088,244. Each of those 2 units have for FY25 a 3% cost of living adjustment in addition to the contractually obligated steps. Again, the steps are for each year of experience or each year of with the district, a teacher or IA will automatically move up to the next step. Teachers have 11 steps, IAs have 8. So the cost there identified, and the way we map that out is a chart with every single employee and what their corresponding rate increase will be. Item number 3 is going to be the steps and COLAs for custodial and maintenance staff. We see there $33,000. That's a pretty comparable number with last year. They're on the FY25 will be the 3rd and final year of their contract where they have a 2.5% COLA contractually guaranteed in addition to the steps. And actually, I want to skip a few first and go right to item number 6. Which is the cost of living adjustments for all non-union staff. So that's our clerical staff, our administrators, everybody outside of those included in 1 through 4. And we're identifying a 3% cost of living adjustment to match up with TRTA Unit A and B. And in terms of context, with looking at FY25's proposal, with FY24, the increases in FY24 versus FY25. The sum of items 1 through 3 and 6 for FY25 is $1.4 million. In FY24, that number was $1.2 million. The reason for that $200,000 flux is primarily about $100,000 of it is going to be associated with that extra 0.5%. With TRTA Unit A and B that is delivered on the last day of FY24, so actually paid out in FY25. It's essentially a deferred COLA. So the value of that is new for FY25, $100,000. You have obviously the growing base of total salaries, so that's going to create about a $50,000 increase over the prior year. And then in FY24, our non-union staff received a 2.5% COLA as opposed to a 3% COLA, which we're proposing here. So again, when we compare FY24 and FY25, there is an increase when you compare the two, but those are the primary reasons why. The other items here, item number 4, column movement, we're budgeting for $235,000. Compared to $90,000 for FY24. This year for FY25 with the new provisions of the TRTA Unit A teachers contract, those who have a Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies, CAGS, nice. It used to be in the same column on the scale as those with a doctorate degree. Now we're moving that back to group in with Masters 45, I believe it is, because the long-term cost associated with that was so significant. So we did have a provision where if they receive, a staff member received their CAGs by June 30th, 2024, that they could be grandfathered into the column. So we saw 13 teachers who noted that they'll be receiving their CAGS degree by the end of this fiscal year. In total, 34 staff members indicated that they'll have anticipate column movement for next year, which is just a massive increase. But we do not anticipate that type of increase for FY26, mainly because of the 13 individuals with CAGS degrees. But certainly a big change there.
So if I could just say, the net impact of that is long-term savings, that the CAGS, even as a credential, is about halfway to a doctorate, so it shouldn't be in the same category as a doctorate. So it's in the right column with M45, so it's a long-term savings, but in essence, what we did is people who have been working on CAGS had another year, 2 years, 3 years, so we kind of condensed, with that grandfathering, condensed 2 or 3 years worth of movement into people who are highly motivated to make sure they get that by June 30th. Again, to confirm, they have to notify us of their intention. They then have to have documentation to us by June 30th. We anticipate everyone still will do that, but the reality is that that may not materialize, but that would be savings in the overall budget.
Let's go through the last couple items in this chart, unless you want to jump into questions already. Let's see, item number 7, a salary contingency. So we've been holding a $150,000 salary contingency line item in the budget for several years. It's there in case of you have to have an additional hire or with any attrition in staff member if the new hire comes in more expensive than the previous individual. So in FY24, we needed to use that line item for just that purpose. Because of IEP, or needs to meet student IEPs, there were a total of 4 instructional assistants that needed to be added across the district. And then there were also some shifts in contracts, like I described, the attrition. So we had to use that entire $150,000 up. That was explained in the FY24 final adjusted budget that was presented in December. But what we're looking to do is replenish that line item in FY25 so that we can still hold just around 0.5% of our total personnel spend for the year, which is, when you look at $30 million, is still cutting it close a little bit. Item 8, substitutes. The narrative on the next page goes into detail about how our spend on the substitute line item over the last few years. We've gone over about $100,000 to $150,000 annually. We've, in years past, received additional state funding. We used in FY23 a portion of that. A portion of the ESSER grants to cover the overages. Long-term sustainability of this line item, we need to bump it again to match that spend. We're paying $125 a day for teaching substitutes over the course of a 7-hour day. So doing the math on the rate, we're trying to remain competitive so that we can get substitute teachers in. But that's the reason why we want to bump that another $50,000 to match the actual spending that's been occurring. And lastly, item 9, which Brian already went into detail about, the 2 salaries, the 1.5 FTEs, the wellness director and the half-time math specialist at the middle school, continuing that programming that was previously funded through ESSER grants. Now we'll have to shift over to the budget.
And if I can just add, so those 2 positions that have existed for, this is the 3rd year, right? The math specialist has been instrumental at the middle school, and the district wellness coordinator, it's obviously Matt, we've talked about, you met Matt in October, was hired. This year was a shift. The first 2 years, it was far more triage for dealing with COVID. And then it has now shifted to moving wellness into an overall focus in curriculum and delivery of curriculum for everyone, and supports as well. So we have this proposed not as an addition, we're keeping the position in place because we see it as a vital support.
Questions on that page 4 content? I know we just covered quite a bit there.
Just to clarify on that salary contingency, that's money that we've carried and it hasn't been like a budget line item. We've had that contingency there. We're replenishing our contingency. So this would, if we are not tapping into it, be potentially dropping out again next year, or would that?
Yeah, it varies year to year. So it is a separate line in the adjusted budget that we do in the fall. This year, we moved all of it out of that line and into needed salary lines. There are years when that doesn't get touched, and then at the end of the year, it's unspent, and so there's no increase going into the next year. But yes, this is, obviously, we've been talking all year about the challenge that we're having this year. It will be depleted in the current year, so that's replenishing it in full. 150's been the target. The number varies depending on how much we have to put back in year over year.
So this is less of a question and I guess more of a request. Obviously, attention to school committee meetings varies depending on topic. We completed a fairly significant negotiation last year, and I was just wondering if you could provide some information, I guess, on that, because I think that's not, it wasn't necessarily on people's radars, and then numbers are showing up here, and I think it's important to kind of understand the context that those negotiations happened in and sort of how they were completed here.
Certainly.
you.
Yeah, so that is right. There are a lot of districts who negotiated last year, the current year, or next year. We're in year 2, is that right? Correct. Going to year 3. Yeah, so the negotiations, we landed on on the teachers and IA's contract, instructional assistants, other districts call them paraprofessionals. We, in essence, teachers, we settled on a 3-3-3. We deferred a 0.5% because we had already finalized the budget last year for the first year to the last day. So in essence, that's Kyle mentioned, it ends up being a net 3.5% increase next year for year 2. Overall, it's a 3-3-3. Many districts are settling 4-4-4, bigger 4-5. So I would say our associations were very reasonable. They understood the confines we're living within, but also argued strongly, as they should, and as we should, to make sure that we're remaining regionally competitive, so we are an attractive place for educators to want to be. So ultimately, there were other provisions in the contract that were settled, but largely that was the big impact, was the 3-3-3, which is larger than we've seen in quite some time, but smaller relative to many of the other settlements happening in the area over the last 2 years. The second piece, just to put, we believe we talked about it a little bit, is that CAGS movement, and that's a column, that's a degree, in essence, halfway between a master's and a doctorate. It had previously lived in the highest column along with a doctorate. CAGS is now separated, and it's, in essence, put halfway on the columns between a master's and a doctorate. So those are the 2 things that created the greatest impact and costs for the Unit A, which is our educators. It's more money than we've ever paid out in a single year as far as increases. It's hard, but it's also very fair, and the negotiations team and ultimately the committee that approved it, I believe, confidently signed a contract that kept us competitive, again, where we've always tried to be. We don't want to be the highest paying. We sure as heck don't want to be the lowest paying. We want to be in the fight. We want to make sure that our health and dental benefits are regionally competitive, so someone doesn't say, great, I'm in, and then gets the benefit information and says, ooh, I can't. So that was the biggest impact with the Unit A teachers. For instructional assistants, years 2 and 3 were a 3.3, but year 1 was really a rebuild. I believe the starting rate for an IA was below minimum wage. So we brought it up roughly to $18 an hour-ish range to start. Again, it meant a big increase for some people, but when someone can go to Starbucks and make $19 or $20 an hour, or work here in some of the most challenging positions in the district for $18, $19, it's really hard to attract people. So the IA contract did a restructuring. There were previously 11 columns. We collapsed those first 3 steps into 4, and so brought the starting rate up pretty significantly, up over $3 an hour. There obviously wasn't as large an increase at the top end of the scale. So those are fixes, right? The current year was the bigger impact for the IAs with that correction that took place in fiscal '24. The big impact for teachers is, as Kyle mentioned, is this next year, because it's the first time we're seeing a 3%, as well as that carried forward 0.5%, which is roughly $100,000. So that's the reason for that larger than normal impact in the base, and then as well as that column movement being, depending on the year, 2 to 3 times the size of the normal budget request. But again, just to reiterate, this is the cost of doing business, right? I mean, this is in general, it's the lower paying jobs that are seeing the highest increase. And we certainly saw that with our discussions with instructional assistants, and they saw the largest, at that low end, the largest increase across the board. In educators as well, again, there wasn't any correction needed. It was just making sure that we're regionally competitive, so that someone will make a decision based on where they want to work, not because they can go somewhere they might not want to be, but make $20,000 more a year. So is that helpful? Okay. Well, then we're moving on.
Pages 5 through 7 give the detail of what we just discussed. Jumping over to 5 and 6. Jumping over to page 7, there's at the top discussing transportation, itemizing out general ed transportation, special ed, as well as homeless. With general ed transportation, we're in the final year of a 5-year transportation contract with NRT Bus. The rates here are an increase of 2.5% over those of the prior. We'll be going out to bid next year during FY25 for the FY26 year. What we've been seeing regionally is those rates increasing significantly, so we'll have that on the horizon, but certainly a $37,000 increase in our general ed transportation line item was one of the more manageable increases for this year. On the flip side, special education transportation has continued to be a challenge. We've discussed it at Finance Subcommittee, as well as part with the larger group here. The challenge has been finding van drivers to go to the private placements. Certainly, we try to group students together as much as possible, and then work with NRT Bus as much as possible. But because those rates are lower and contractually fixed, unfortunately, we haven't been able to go with NRT all the time because of the lack of drivers, and the alternatives are extremely expensive. So what we see here for a rate increase is associated with a 5% overall increase in rates, as well as some additional placements that we see. Offsetting the increase is a $450,000 reimbursement that we're anticipating getting from the state circuit breaker, where they reimburse a portion. It was a little funny this year in terms of the way that they reimbursed it. Typically, it's been, or what was shared with us, is that over a certain threshold, we would be reimbursed 75% of all applicable charges. They reimbursed 57%. There's discussion that they might end up reimbursing more. Hate that they did the flip, because it's weird. Wish they did like 58%. But anywho, so what we projected for next year is an anticipated reimbursement of 57%, just to be conservative there, based on the projected spend for this year. Because again, that reimbursement is based on costs that we're incurring in FY '24 will be reimbursed in FY '25. So that's a $187,000 increase.
Can I just say, so the net, you remember we've talked about this over the course of the year, the net increase in the out-of-pocket costs is higher, much higher than that. The issue is we're going to get more reimbursement from Circuit Breaker, even at the 57%, on the costs we're paying this year. So the challenges that we're facing this year help offset what would have been more to the tune of $300,000 and change plus in special education transportation. That's the numbers we're dealing with this year, and why it's actually less next year when we're assuming it's still going to be that added cost. We'll do everything we can to find other ways around that, but.
Last item in that chart, homeless transportation. So there's two different types of scenarios where we provide homeless transportation. The first is going to be if housing is disrupted for a family and say that they're temporarily residing in another community. We are legally required to provide transportation for those students from that town or community over to Triton. We do split the cost 50-50 with the other community, and then ultimately for that type of transportation will be reimbursed around 88% from the state. So there's a lot of mechanics going on there. The other type of transportation we provide are for students who are in a DCF or a foster placement. With those particular students, it's a different reimbursement process. It ends up being about 20% of the total spend that we end up getting back, and we don't get to split the cost with the community that they're residing in. Over the last few years, or last year, FY '23 and FY '24, we've seen a significant increase, unfortunately, in the number of students with housing disruption, and then a corresponding increase in homeless transportation costs. It's a scenario where we don't have the ability to go with NRT bus all the time. The other contractors, transportation providers, are extremely expensive. We've been using available funds to offset these overages in FY '23 and '24, but looking at this trend, long-term sustainability, we are recommending increasing that line by $50,000 to try and offset those increased costs.
I have a question. Going forward, for the general education transportation, because of the amount of bids that you're possibly not going to receive, this could actually be a higher number in years to come.
Years to come. Yes.
Yeah.
Not next year.
It's beginning in FY '26. We are still carrying, so we are operating 19 yellow buses across the three communities. We still have budgeted 21 buses. When was it that we cut back? FY '24, yeah. So we were operating and budgeting 23 buses initially, but then we had pared back that. So long story short, depending on what enrollment figures look like, it's nice to have that buffer of the 2 buses because we wanted to add it back. Certainly, you see them drive by and some of them are packed. The routes are longer than we'd like to see them be, but if we had to dial that back to budgeting and operating 19 buses, that would be an option even to offset in FY '26.
Communities in bid years have seen increases hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it doesn't go from 38 to 75. Like there are districts who have seen $250,000, $300,000 increase in the bids depending on the number of people who show up.
Yeah, but I'm just preparing people that this number could get bigger in coming years because our bids you only have 1 or 2 bids now.
And the only other thing that I just wanted to make sure that I clarified and had it spoken out was even though we're budgeting 21 buses and we're only using 19, we're only paying for 19. We're not paying for the other two or we're not paying for buses that we have to cut for the day.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that.
And I just want to add, I would be very hesitant to take those 2 buses out because we need them, right? As soon as NRT can get those drivers, we could use all 4, the 2 that we cut out. I mean, again, this all happened because NRT couldn't fill the slots, right? This was not, we chose to get rid of buses. We made do with 21, and then 2 more got consolidated, and so it's happening. It is not happening well. So we need that money in there, so when we can add the 2 buses back, we can do that.
Okay. At the bottom of the page, there's a chart for insurance, pensions, and other. Items 1 and 2 are our Blue Cross Blue Shield plans for health and dental. That's where we pay 70% of the costs, the premium costs associated with the majority of the plans. The PPO plan is 61-39 split. Anyway, we haven't found out yet what the actual rate increase is. The trust is, the Maya Trust is holding their annual meeting this weekend, where they'll be releasing the high and low of the trust average. We usually expect about a week or 2 after that what our actual rate increase will be. We're based on some information that was shared with us earlier in the fall, we included a 6% increase in costs there. Our experience levels from a financial standpoint had been favorable over the last year or so. So that's what's, when you look at the health trends across the state, the conversations have been significant cost increases, but that information that was shared with us at that time was that our results were more favorable. So keeping our fingers crossed there that will come in on the mark. MedX plans, that's our MedX supplement for those retirees over 65 years old. Those renewals are on a calendar year basis rather than in a fiscal year basis. So we have a locked-in rate increase of 7.19%. And I should say that the corresponding change, the dollar change that you're seeing on the right side of that chart, that's based on our current enrollment figures. So in an ideal scenario, we might have 1 or 2 plans extra in there in case someone has a qualifying life event where they're able to shift over to our plan, or during open enrollment, we might see some increased participation. But right now, we're budgeting based on actual enrollment because of the challenges with those rate increases. Any questions on medical plan increases? A more manageable increase this year compared to prior years. Number 4, Essex Regional Retirement System. That's the ERRS. Confirmed increase of $43,000 in years past. It's always been north of $100,000, $150,000 as a rate increase. The reason being is not to get into the weeds, but they assume a 6.5% increase in actuarially determined costs. And then offsetting that will be any changes in our share of the pie, so to say. So all of the member communities that are part of Essex Regional, they take the total cost of providing those pension services and the future costs, and then they divide them based on our percentage share of payroll relative to the other communities. So other communities' payrolls increased more than ours, so our share of the pie decreased. Our cost was less expensive than it's been in years past, or the increase has been less in years past. So that was helpful. Item 5, property liability insurance, working with our, Fred C. Church is our broker, and then we have our general liability policies with various insurance agencies, working on confirming those rates, but we put a 10% placeholder in for that line item. Workers' comp, our experience levels over the last couple of years have been challenging. Some long-term absences or long-term events that occurred So that's increasing our rates overall. So you see a significant dollar value increase, but if all goes well for a few years and we don't have those experience levels, they could hopefully not repeat that, but that's the reason why you have the increase. And then lastly, item 7, the Medicare tax. That's a payroll tax. That's a 50-50 split between the employee and employer. The district share is 1.45% of total payroll. We haven't adjusted that line item in 3 or 4 years, but in FY '23 and FY '24, we've been seeing that overage kind of grow a little bit to the point where we need to adjust it to match our total payroll spend, the calculation. So we're proposing the $50,000 add to match those expenditure levels. Questions? Nice. Cool, thanks. Jumping to page 9, I'll keep going. Let's see, starting at the top, electricity. So utilities and maintenance for this particular chart. Electricity, we've talked at length about, where in FY '25, we'll be seeing a significant increase in our overall rates. It was around 25%, because of pairing that with the solar credits that we have for the solar farm over in Salisbury. We had been accumulating a significant balance because we've been purchasing more solar credits than we've actually needed to use. We'll be able to offset the increases in our electricity costs with those accumulated credits. So we're actually proposing a 0 change for that line item. So blessing in disguise there with the solar credits. Heating fuel, again, the rates, we were able to lock in. Those ones were actually favorable rate changes. So we level funded that line item. Newbury Elementary, Pine Grove, and Salisbury, we are including level funding. Not ideal, not where we want to be, but looking at the reality of the budget position that we're in this year, our expenditure levels in those 3 buildings have been matching relatively what we have been budgeting. In comparison, though, the middle high school campus, I don't think I need to go at length about that, but we've been significantly overexpending that line item the last few years. We've been able to use savings from buses not running or other areas, but looking at the long-term viability of that line item, especially paired with our mission to get accepted into the MSBA core program, we want to make sure that we're increasing that line item so we can maintain this facility.
And just to make sure the maintenance that's being done is not cosmetic things, it's making sure the roof is intact and keeping leaks, just summarize, to a minimum, right? This building leaks like a sieve. It's when it's in the middle of the gym, literally center court, we've got to find a way to fix that. So none of this is pretty cosmetic things. This is basic building upkeep.
Jumping to page 10, special education services. The first item there, out-of-district tuition. So this is our private placements, either with collaboratives or private day schools, so to meet the needs of students within our district. We've been speaking with the Finance Subcommittee and the whole group about the additional placements that we've been seeing, as well as the added costs for tuitions of those placements. The state set or indicated about a 5%, we could expect a 5% rate increase in the private day placements. With the collaboratives, we're also going to see some rate increases, and then there's a narrative there in the chart on the bottom discussing the North Shore Consortium tuitions, where we're going to be seeing a rate increase of between 8% and 14% on our students, as well as a $65,000 one-time assessment. And this is due to facility needs at that campus. I don't know if you want to get into any more, but we've embedded those added costs into our assumptions here, as well as the additional placements we believe may occur next year. Offsetting those increased costs are a state circuit breaker reimbursement. Similar, it mirrors the transportation reimbursement that we receive, where they have a floor or a cap, and then we're reimbursed 75% of all costs beyond that cap. We've been seeing these added increased costs over the last few years, so we are fortunately seeing an increase in reimbursement from the state as well, added $182,000 over what we're receiving in FY24, so that helps. But at the end of the day, it's still going, based on our projections, a $265,000 increased spend. Do you want to get into it?
The one thing I was going to say is I've heard people ask, well, if you have the threshold and costs keep going up, how come you're not just getting more and more and more money? But the threshold changes as well. So the inflation factor that's applied in the budget is also applied to the threshold. So when SOA was rewritten, it was 45,000 and change. It's 51,000 and change. So that 6,000 per student, we're now paying. And it's the amount above that 51 and change that we receive 75% of. So it's everything in the formula moves, which means, yes, a higher tuition, we get more money reimbursed to us, but it's proportionally, it's ticked away by that threshold being adjusted.
And one other challenge with this line item for FY25 is, if you'll remember on the FY24 budget process, we anticipated a significant increase in costs. Going through the budget process, we ended up level funding the general fund line item for tuitions with the assumption that we'll dip into circuit breaker reserves, funding that we had set aside. We are going to need to fully expend those circuit breaker reserves in FY24. So if we go over in FY25, we don't have our savings account that we can dip into. So we need to, where in the past we could be a little more conservative with this line item, we'd have buffer essentially because we have those reserves. We have to be careful. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And then the other two special ed lines there, contracted services and supplies and materials. This is the example Brian shared earlier, where if those two lines, the changes net out to zero because we're reallocating resources. The primary reason for that $32,000 is we had services we were contracting out previously that with changes in caseloads for certain staff members, we were able to bring those services in-house rather than contracting out. However, with the supplies materials line item, which includes equipment for some of our specialized programs that we're offering at the different school locations, we've been needing to purchase that equipment. So we're shifting those funds to the supplies and materials line item. Questions there? Page 11, school choice sending tuitions, charter school sending tuitions. Actually, I won't go into detail again, except to say the student head counts that Brian was describing at the beginning, we have 115 students choicing out of the district versus 80 students choicing into the district. So that's that disparity that creates a financial challenge as well.
And just to note here, we're going to do some more work on learning why those students who have choiced out new, obviously those students who leave on choice and continue, but we've had discussions about this campus, and I believe that the building is driving people's decisions. We've seen a higher number of students choicing out at the high school than we had previously. So I think there's more to unpack there, and we need to get into that. I know we have a facilities subcommittee being formed, and those are the types of discussions beyond just the nitty-gritty and engineering decisions about what needs to be made. It's about how can we make sure that we're setting a plan forward where we're not losing students based on people make decisions with their feet, and I fear that's happening.
Jump to page 12, last page of this section. So again, the increase in costs separated out into two sections, fixed costs and level services, what I just went through. And then on this page here is our costs associated with continuing prior commitments. The first box that you see there is the stabilization fund contribution. That was as part of our long-term financial planning policy that the committee adopted. We first established the stabilization fund. There was an initial contribution in FY23 of $1.5 million. In FY24, as part of that policy, we made the first deposit of second deposit of $75,000. And then that policy dictates that we increase the funding to $150,000 annually. So the $75,000 increase you see here increases the dollar value of that particular line item to 150 total. Our current balance as of date is around 1.6 million because we are fortunately earning interest on those accounts. We have it in over with Institution for Savings. It's not invested because we want to make sure that it's a liquid investment. And pause there. But yeah, so we're proposing to increase that line item by 75,000. And then the second chart is the multi-year Chromebook refresh. This was the 4-year implementation that we had discussed. The first year was in FY23, continued into FY24, and then 25 and 26 of $50,000 annually. And part of that plan was shifting the initial rollout of the one-to-one Chromebook plan that was funded through ESSER grant, COVID grant relief funds, into our budget so it would be sustainable from a long-term perspective. That's a $200,000 total spend over 4 years. And so the details of that plan stipulate that a student will receive a new Chromebook in grades 1, grades 5, and grades 9. Those Chromebooks refreshed during those time periods. So looking to continue that commitment. All right, totals at the bottom, scary numbers. The projected increase in the level services budget, that 3.3.
Kyle, can I just stop you for a
Yes.
second? Just a request again, could you talk about the financial reserve policy and why that 75,000 is being put in there, please? Because again, just
Thank you.
cognizant of the fact that people don't follow the whole
Yeah.
time. So I think it's important to say it's not just $75,000 in there just to put money aside.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of going through that financial reserve policy, credit rating agencies who look at our financial position and ultimately dictate the interest rate that we will borrow funds, want to see districts have varied and substantial reserve levels to be able to navigate the unknown, whether that's unplanned maintenance or future projects. So those rating agencies, they recommend that we have those reserve levels of up to 15% of our total operating budget. So when you look at around a $50 million level, the 15% of what that would be, we've been able and fortunate through planning to get up to that $1.6 million level. We have a ways to go. For us, that $1.6 million, the initial plan for those funds were when we get accepted to the MSBA core program, to use those reserves to offset the cost of a feasibility study, which assesses or identifies a plan for whether we renovate or build a new building. So we want to make sure that we have those funds available. With the inflation, we know that cost rise of even that feasibility study where we had the 1.5, we need to make sure that when we do get accepted into the program, we have enough funds set aside, or as we navigate the future and the delay in getting accepted into that program, if some sort of event occurs, we have a Plan B. So we need to make sure that we have that contingency. Thank you.
And can I just add, so the, beyond, Kyle mentioned in the interim and until when we get accepted into the MSBA, so whether that project is a small renovation or a large-scale renovation, we have to borrow funds, right? So similar, or unlike, let's take the Pine Grove project, the town of Rowley owns that building, so it was the town that borrowed the funds, it was the town's bond rating that impacted the rates. We, as the district, own this campus, which means we will incur the debt. We currently have the lowest bond rating, used to be the other way around. We currently have the lowest bond rating. So the goal here in instituting this plan is to increase so that when we borrow money in the years ahead, we actually have some runway to increase that rate, which will increase our rating, which will overall drive down the interest rates when we do actually borrow funds. So this is one of those things where we have to spend the money to maintain and even increase those reserves, so we save the towns when they're assessed for a building project down the future. So the rate that we're borrowing at, that they're being assessed at, is lower. So it actually, small money now to overall improve the cost of a borrowing project in the future. And then beyond, right, so once these lines get established in the budget and they're just funding stabilization and OPEB annually, we then, as Kyle mentioned, have money to deal with issues in the interim until we have a finished project. But then beyond that, we have a capital stabilization line that allows us to better fund and upkeep routine preventative maintenance, so we address issues as they come along, extending the useful life of the building as a whole.
Thank you. So of all those items, the total expenditure increase, level services in bold there, just shy of 3,479,764. I think you'll jump into the next pages there, looking at the.
Yeah. Right, so that number is usually a number we're looking at for our, what's the word we use, the preferred, the desired, the goal, right? That's usually the number, the 3-point-something million, where we're saying this is what we really want to be able to add, and it's adding new positions and structure. And we work down from there, right? That's the number to take exactly what we have today and move it into fiscal '25. With that being the case, now we get to the non-routine part of this presentation, which is we're actually proposing some reductions right here from the get-go to get that number back even into a ballpark where we feel like we can have a plan moving forward. Again, we'll come to you next week with a little more clarity around the medical and whether we can, potentially we would have to assume that up. Hopefully not. Hopefully we can assume that number down. And we will also have the state's figures from the governor when she releases her budget by next Wednesday. She's probably literally as we speak about to give her State of the Commonwealth address. It's often that the budget is released 24 to 48 hours after that. So we could actually have that by Friday. But we'll be able to, tonight's presentation is about the expenditures. Next week, we'll come back to you with some information about what that net impact is on assessments to member towns. So walk you through some of the reductions that we proposed here. I want to note that some of these are reductions we would make regardless, right? So some of these would be happening in a normal year, even if we were adding other positions and costs weren't what they are, simply because of attrition and some changes that we're seeing. So if we look at the first one, you remember in fiscal '24, current year, we shifted 2 medical plans from the general fund into the food services budget. We're proposing we shift 2 more. Again, obviously, we've had a significant influx of money, federal and state money, through universal free school meals. So that increased revenue is allowing us to make decisions about long-term decisions about equipment and improvements and rethinking the food services program, currently negotiating a contract. But there is a $40,000 savings by shifting 2 plans into that revolving account. Again, all state revenue comes into a revolving, all food services salaries are paid out of that revolving account. The next 2, we've talked about these. These ended up happening when we started drafting this document. This was a proposal. By the time it landed before you Friday night when it was posted, or tonight, these two shifts have already occurred. As I noted in the messages out, it doesn't mean they couldn't be reversed if some miracle happens and numbers get remarkably better. Obviously, don't believe that's going to happen. But the first is the SEL teacher. The teacher shifted to a therapist role within the REACH program. And currently, by the end of this month, beginning of February, the STEM teacher will be shifting from the STEM role over to a middle school science position. So those decisions were made this year to fill a short-term need. It's very difficult to find positions. Well, I should stop right there. These days, it's just difficult to fill positions. But certainly to find high-quality educators mid-year is extremely challenging. So we made the difficult decision to move those 2 very talented educators from their current roles with SEL and STEM into positions that had come open through resignation. So ultimately, you can see the savings that it yields there, and those are actual figures given the shifts that already occurred. The next 3 at Newbury, Pine Grove, in Salisbury, we initially talked about 6th grade class sizes. At Newbury, it's actually, you see a 0 here. Newbury was due to actually add. We'll get to at the end, we'll look at the actual class sizes. They were actually due to add a 6th grade section because they had some 2s, and they're moving back to 3 sections per grade level. So it's not a cut, but it should have been an increase. And so the net impact is class sizes of 25, 26 at Newbury Elementary. If you go over the page to Pine Grove, and we talked about here, so I should say this, all of these decisions, these proposals assume enrollments as they are today. Things shift, right? We could get a whole slew of move-ins in one grade level in one school. We could have move-outs, and ultimately a decision could be made to say, you know what, we're not going to cut the teacher at 6th grade. At Pine Grove, we thought about maybe talking with Nicole, maybe at 2nd grade. No decisions are made. At Salisbury, the reduction is shown on paper and on the numbers in 6th grade. Perhaps it could be 3rd grade. But in looking through, that has everything to do with the cohorts and the needs within the cohort, and these, where it actually lands, wouldn't shift until the end of the year when we know enrollments. So at Newbury, it's not a savings, we're just not adding, but it's worth noting because that creates large class sizes. At Pine Grove, it's actually a retirement of a special educator, and then there'll be shifting of roles and responsibilities that will allow that reduction. And then at Salisbury, it's listed here as a non-renewal because it's not a reduction in force means we're getting to tenured or professional status level teachers, and we're not. It's not a retirement that's offset that. So the standard other option is a non-renewal. That doesn't mean it's a teacher at Salisbury in grade 6, right? Lots of things, we see this every year. Things shift, people request transfers, their spouses get a job in another state and they move. So it's listed as a non-renewal so that it can be listed as how we arrived at a savings. But that could end up being more savings, depending on if someone else decides to retire or someone doesn't return and we shift someone in there. We don't then have to offset the costs with unemployment assumptions. A benefit package could also fall off, which saves another $20,000. So these are just a way of making some assumptions about what the savings would be. But to say concretely, no one should assume that if they see, anyone at 6th grade across the district, all of our 6th grade teachers, that doesn't mean one of the 6th grade teachers is losing their position. if we need one less section, probably means some movement around, but it doesn't automatically mean that there can't be any assumptions at this point, is what I should say. So the net impact of those three lines, again, it's reductions at Pine Grove and Salisbury. It's just not adding at Newbury, means larger class sizes at the three schools. It's at Newbury 25, 26, Pine Grove 24, 25, and Salisbury it takes them to 19 and 20 in the sixth grade. There's also a reduction of 2 special educators at Salisbury Elementary School. I noted here, and it's noted in the back as well, we have committed to maintain smaller ratios at Salisbury Elementary School based on the needs. This maintains, if actually while I'm talking about it, it's probably easier to just take you to page 18 at the very bottom. There's some caseload information. I'll just go through these pages quickly now since I think we talked about the items that impact this. On page 18 at the bottom, you can see the total number of IEPs for general support. This pulls out specialized programs, the REACH program, the TLC program. It pulls out occupational therapy services or speech services or any of those. This is general. Usually it's general education and special education, but it's a general special education teacher providing core math, English language arts, executive functioning types of services. Those caseloads are reflective of total population and the number of educators. So at Newbury, there are 46 IEPs that are general support, 4.5 educators for a caseload of 10.2. At Pine Grove, it's 58 total IEPs with 6 special educators for a caseload of 9.7. And at Salisbury, with the 2 reductions, it's a caseload of 57 with 8 special educators for an average caseload of 7.1. So the shift is not, it's maintaining those lower caseloads and supports. Caseloads don't tell the whole story. If we pass the microphone out to the principals and talked about, you can have one IEP that has 3 times the overall requirements and demands of another IEP. So it's not pure that you can just divide the number of IEPs by the number of special educators, but this still does, with these 2 reductions, this is about shifting in caseloads and providing supports. This still does maintain a significantly lower student-to-teacher ratio for caseloads at Salisbury. Middle school and high school are roughly the same with the caseload, 13.4 and 13.8. Obviously, the level of services at the middle school and high school level tends to be less and less, and we're in a specialized program. If I just take you back to page 16, just to look at those class sizes for 6th grade, again, this document assumes that all the other grade levels stay intact. We know there's movement, but assuming all the grade levels stay intact, and you can see we assumed the same size incoming preschool and kindergarten, roughly. We assumed roughly 3 sections at each of the schools. So you end up with 3 sections across the board, or it should have been 3 sections across the board next year at Newbury, which would have been kept the 5th grade going into 6th grade at roughly 17s. Instead, they go to 25, 26. At Pine Grove, it's 3s, 4s, and 2s. If we take that 5th grade currently at 3 sections down to 2 sections, it makes the 6th grade 24, 25. And then over the page at Salisbury, you can see there's currently 4 sections of 5th grade, and rather than staying 4, it goes down to 3 and makes the classes 19, 20, 20. So that's with the impact of those reductions that I mentioned previously in the chart. Middle school and high school, it's obviously we can't show classes because they vary wildly. Al's been working on the middle school schedule to utilize, provide more opportunity so that students or teachers who are teaching core and perhaps some electives, which would affect class sizes. And at the high school, again, Patrick has assumed that we roll what did we lose, 20? Yeah, we lost 20 students, took 21 students off of the incoming 8th grade to show our high school staying roughly the same size overall. I want to stop there as far as those are the, I think those are the, yeah, I think those are the positions that I assumed would garner some questions. Or should I just keep going? I'll just keep going. So at the elementaries, it's the 6th grade that's impacted. At the middle school, it's actually a current educator providing wellness instruction, also EL instruction, going to be fully utilizing the EL portion, backfilling the other instruction with other educators within the building, so there isn't a loss of those classes, but providing, we would have had to have add more EL support if we didn't make this shift. So similar to Newbury, it's not a savings, it's just an avoided increase that we would have had to have made. We would have had to have added more English learner support. So this utilizes an existing resource and actually removes a section at the high school. You know, remember teachers can teach an extra section for .2, and that's where the savings ends up, and that educator would take that .2 support. One instructional assistant at the middle school that is based on caseloads and not denying anyone services or programming. It's just an ability to remove that support. At the high school, 102,000, a little over 102, almost 103,000, made up of 1.4 sections total, 1.4 FTE, which is largely comprised of .2s and .1s. Generally, there is some flexibility within the schedule, and you might need an extra math section on a given year, but one less science section to meet the course requests. So there's always some float. As we've talked about, the high school has decreased over the past couple of years, notably, and so these can be pulled out without any direct impact. It removes some flexibility, that there might be some where we say we can't run that section when we otherwise might have, but it doesn't remove any offerings per se out of the gate by reducing that. This would be one of those that on a normal year, we might say, okay, we need to trim that flexibility back a bit. At the high school also, again, based on the needs overall, and additional services that are provided by other special educators. It's reducing one instructional assistant. And then within athletics, we have been without an athletic director support for a full year? A calendar year now. So we have been without. Is it great to have? Of course it is. We now, as you know, we've talked about, we have Joel McKenna in as the interim athletic director. And so we believe, again, it would be great to keep that in place, but we have survived and done okay without it for a year. And so this proposes not replacing that. And then there's other programs that we've tried to keep maintaining and offering, whether it's a Prep for Success or a JV2, which is the former freshman teams that we've wanted to keep intact, but we just haven't had the students to fill a roster. That we're proposing cutting those, and it means that if the roster does emerge, we then couldn't run the team, but we believe it's a risk we need to take at this point. So all in, the savings is $866,185. So the $3.479 million from over the page that Kyle mentioned, if you offset that by $866,000, we're at a net proposed increase of $2.613 million. And I already went over the resulting enrollment data, but I'll say one more time that those next two pages of class sizes and enrollments and special ed caseloads assume any of the reductions proposed on pages 13, 14, and 15. any questions?
Are we talking about any specific, like the middle school reduction says that it will be the loss of elective sections? Is that anything in particular that we know now, or is, like, if this were to happen, would we know what those would be? Or are those going to be driven by student interest and what would be low?
Al, is it safe to say to be determined?
Yeah, I mean, an example would be, I would probably have to, given this budget goal, I would have to move my document. Hi, all right. An example would be, presently I do a strength and conditioning elective using my PE teacher. I'm looking at moving him to teach a section of wellness next year, so we wouldn't be able to offer that elective. That would be an example of how we have to move some people around to be able to fill someone to teach those classes. If that was the question. Was that the question? Yeah. That's what I thought.
And just as a reminder, teachers can teach up to 20% outside of their license. So if you have a history teacher that also has a passion and proclivity to some mathematics course elective or even a course, they could teach that if we believe they're qualified and capable of teaching outside their license. So right when times are good, we know everyone's teaching fully within their license. When we start trimming back, we start to have to be more creative. And it's great to be able to have all those offerings, but it's going to be very challenging to maintain that.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
I guess some of my questions here around the sixth grade class sizes. As an educator, I always kind of look at like 18 is the sweet spot. You get 16 to 20 kids in a class, and you get the combination of individual attention and the ability for the students to collaborate. But if you get much lower than that, you have less collaboration. And if you get more than that, you start losing the one-to-one time. And I guess looking at, 25, 26 kids in sixth grade, and then talking about coming here as a reason to this building and the facilities as being a reason that people are choicing out. If the last experience in the elementary schools, which my experience talking to families is our parents love the elementary schools for the most part. They like having the kids there, and then if the last experience is now one that's less effective, is that going to drive more choicing out? And, it's a very challenging year, and some of those class size decisions have to be made. And when you're talking about, 51, is that 2 sections versus 3 sections, and it's 17, it's logical to look there, but I also see the educational trade-offs for the students, and then a cascade effect where if we have more students choicing out, this is impacting both our choice numbers and potentially fewer students choicing in. And then with enrollment declining, that impacts our overall state numbers as well. So that's, I guess that's not a question, that's a comment, and understanding why these are being made, but also that we owe it to the families to have the discussion of what are the trade-offs that we are talking about, what are the educational trade-offs, as well as what are the potential longer-term financial implications.
Can I jump in on that
Yep.
too, Paul? Because it's on topic with my question. 5th and 6th grade was a cohort that was struggling academically in a few of the schools, correct? that cohort was one that we were watching,
Depends on the school.
But
Yep,
it-
absolutely. Yeah.
without calling, just,
Yep. Hence part of the discussion, right, about currently at
Kind of.
6, maybe it's another element.
I just want to
Yep.
point out that it has been a discussion at this table, so that is going to be looked at closely.
Absolutely, and I would say to you, right, these, if I asked Beth, Catherine, and Nicole to come up here, these would be 3 we would not be proposing to you, right? This is not because right, overall, Pine Grove has seen an uptick in enrollment. Newbury is fairly stable. Salisbury has been decreasing in overall enrollment. With schools around the same size, all of the class sizes are at the worst possible numbers because 3 to 2 is impossible. So, or really challenging, when you're in those higher 60s, 70s, you can go from 4 to 3, and it's easier, less impactful. So the enrollments that the schools are at in that 4 to 450, it makes it really challenging because you're choosing between 3 and 2 or 3 sections. I don't think anyone, with what you said, Paul, I fully agree, right? It is a challenging grade level to be able, or to put those class sizes in place. When we look to the middle school and we talk about class sizes, we're reducing, once you get to middle school in fully departmentalized, and then into the high school with departments, you remove larger sections. If we start removing, there isn't a place where you can say this is what the resulting class size will be. It's a bigger puzzle. This was a place where we felt like ultimately I don't want to say there's an impact. There is a significant impact there. Looking at a number of 3.4 million, right? The overall increase to the towns last year was roughly 2.2 million, which the net effect was about 1.9 being assessed to the towns. If we netted off a couple $100,000 in revenues, even with these figures, we're looking at, why can't I find the number? 2.6. So we're 700,000 higher right now with these reductions than we were last year, net increase to the towns. So if we can take things off the table, put things back on the table, this was our thinking as far as a starting point, with the understanding that we may have to go further. But I don't disagree with anything you've said.
Is it on the same topic?
I don't know. It's similar, you're kind of going with what Paul said about talking about the impact of reductions and sort of wide ranging. Why don't you go?
I was just going to say, in general, like, we don't get to make the decision on what grade it is. So, I mean, I think we can argue that, that you don't want to have one classroom teacher reduction at each elementary school. But as far as whether it's 6th grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, kindergarten, that decision is up to the superintendent and the building principal. I mean, we can always provide our opinion, but I think the larger question in reviewing these documents is more one classroom teacher per elementary school.
Yes, and that's right, that's a possible, as a result of tonight, you could come back and say, next week, I want you to restore those and find another $500,000 to cut. I mean, you could say to us whatever you want to say or charge us with. For this one, if we restored that at the three schools, it would be at the loss of the cut, and then we're adding the cost at Newbury because we didn't actually save anything. So 100, we're talking about probably, right? What was the total there? 175, or probably 260 to add that back in.
So it's a strange budget place, I feel like we've landed in, because it's, you know, it always feels like it's either level services or level funding or something else, and this doesn't seem to land in any of those boxes neatly. So just as I was going through, I'm not comfortable calling it level services. I was thinking about it today as I was reading through it, and I don't think that anything I'm going to say right now is anything that anyone sitting at this table doesn't already know, but as Nerissa has pointed out, for people watching at home or haven't been following along, I think it's all of this is stuff that needs to be put out there. Level funded supplying right now is a cut. It's a burden that's borne by the staff who will be expending time, expending effort, and very likely expending their own money to offset it. That's time, energy that I'd much rather see put into lesson planning, assessment, all of that type of thing. This mentioned, spots where we don't have enough substitutes to cover. The disruption that causes in a school over the course of a given day is, it's disruptive for the school itself, it's disruptive for the teacher that's out in terms of trying to put the lesson planning in place, understanding what the students can be expected to cover while they're out. All of that gets difficult. And I'd say the same thing for level funding of maintenance. I don't need to talk about this building. We all know where this building is at. But NES, I know Beth last year came in and was talking about the floor tiling cracking already. That's a building that's starting to, work its way into the conversation. All of those things impacts learning. And impact learning. And I don't want to see PGS wind up in that. I don't want to lose what we have there as well. And then when you get into the reductions, in the midst of a mental health crisis, I love that we still have the district wellness coordinator. I don't know that has the same impact as it could have if we continued to have that roll out. I think that's something where the value in it was just starting to be seen. And I hate losing it now. I'd say the same for STEM. I know that, again, and I apologize, I'm much more familiar with NES, but that makerspace was in place and was a popular and wonderful thing for the kids. And I saw meeting last year with the open house and some of the stuff that was going on in that STEM program and the enthusiasm. I like that. Class sizes across the board. I can't begin to think what that means for elementary schools. I think Paul kind of talked about that. At the high school, when you've got larger class sizes, it means less frequent or less rigorous assessment. It means less time can be spent on providing good feedback, all of those things. And then loss of elective courses. I really do worry, I think you just spoke to this, but when you look at the course offerings, every time Patrick has come in here, one of the things that he's lauded, and rightly so, about the high school is the breadth of offerings that we have. I can't think of another school that has metalsmithing, and all of those things. It's something that attracts people here. And then I think about who this is impacting, and this goes beyond the budget a little bit. Students at the middle school, high school campus right now are in grades 3 through 8 when the pandemic began. They lost some pretty core years there. Particularly, I think, middle school. I see all the time that there's something about going through that process of going through middle school and being a middle schooler that maybe gets worked out of the system, and we've seen behaviors in high school that we haven't seen before. Those are a key transitional moment. These students need more. The other day last week, you gave a best case scenario of a new school being completed in the spring of 30, I think is what you said. So in that scenario, none of those students are going to see the benefits of the new building for even a single year. The first students to graduate from that would be our current 6th graders. The first students who'd spend all of high school in a new building are now in 2nd grade. And the first students who'd spend all 6 years here are our current kindergartners. And I'm bringing that up because one of the things that we have been talking about since I've been here is trying to spend with an eye towards the future, of not asking the towns for too much right now, because we need to be stewards of this campus. We need to make sure that we can, in the long term, make this building what it needs to be. It's not viable right now. We all know that. But I feel like right now to not at least talk about keeping this intact and potentially looking for a bigger budget this year that's a legit services, we're balancing that future, the burden of that future on this generation of students. The students who are most impacted by the pandemic will be the ones who get no benefit from that, who will see the cuts come through here and will be here during the construction, which is an impact of its own. I lived through that in high school. It was there. I think it's a discussion that we need to have, that this budget isn't enough, that we need to go further with it. I don't think it's not a happy discussion. It's not a good one. It would require that, but I just don't see this meeting the needs of our students right now. And I understand why. I understand that there's that long-term piece, but I worry about what that means for today's students.
Does anybody have anything else?
Jump in sort of on the same thing, because it needs to be articulated, that when I talk to families, and my children are younger, and so the families that I talk to are the younger families, the response to the budget is, we should be growing. And, you know, those are the younger families who are looking at this and saying, my children are potentially here for another, 7, 8, 10, 12 years. But those are families that we also have to articulate their needs and wants. This is a student-facing list of cuts. This is a list of cuts that is people and jobs that are directly facing the students. And I think, so I've lived through the experience of having administrative churn, where even for a time not having a building principal, and having people stepping into and out of administrative roles that they had no experience in or were not qualified to do, but were filling the role to keep the ship sailing. And when that happened, the education stays for a while. There's a fall off, but the students in the classroom get the education from the people who are there and the supports they need from the people that they see in their day. The children aren't always getting the education from the people that they don't see. The people they don't see are the people who are, yes, helping the educators and the support staff grow and develop, and that's important, and putting in the long-term plans is important for the long-term health. But I look at this, what we have here and what we saw last year, and I don't see a change. I don't see any time in the near future where we're talking about, oh, look, we have 2.5% for level services. We've got buses coming up next year, and we can anticipate whatever else savings might materialize are going to get eaten up in transportation. And so are we going to be looking at $3 million again next year? And so anything we cut now is probably not coming back for a little while. And the other end of looking at where cuts can be that are not student-facing is that the people who make the decisions ultimately about what gets presented to us are mostly people who aren't student-facing. And so when the burden falls on the people who don't face students instead of the students themselves, then there's a greater urgency to restore what needs to be restored. In particular, I think about the STEM. This is something that 2 years ago, we were all very excited to add, and initially, the building principals all came to us saying, we want one each. And last year, they said, we want one each. And we're at it, we got it for a year, 1/3 of a year for each school, and half service to the schools this year, and now it's gone for the rest of this year, and so we have that inequity between the elementary schools that we often talk about not wanting to have. We've had that occur twice now this year, and that drives that course, that special drove enthusiasm in Newbury in the elementary grades this fall that I saw directly. Not just, my children and their peers, but everybody that I was talking to, every time I walked into that building, how much enthusiasm there was for that. And that adds to our programming in new and exciting ways and makes those schools a exciting place to be and a good place to learn and a fun place to learn. And those skills are not developed elsewhere, and they're essential. We have smaller class sizes at the high school and we can support some class size increases there with 1.4 FTE with 7 sections roughly. And, yeah, that's going to mean a couple of classes that are bigger than we'd like somewhere probably. But that's like supportable. The cost there is not, to the students, is not real significant. Losing, certain electives out of the middle school is a cost, but hopefully it's not a significant one borne by a significant number of people. I don't like those class sizes of 25 or 26, and I understand it may be necessary. But I would like to see a shift in some different ideas brought about what cuts could be made when we're here next week.
Can I just, in real terms, what you're asking is to not reduce classroom teachers at the elementary, not reduce social emotional, not reduce STEM, and then to find corresponding cuts that are not student facing for those? I guess I'm a little bit confused about what the looking at this, what you said, matching the reality against what I have on paper here. So can you clarify, please, so I just understand?
For me, I understand these changes, and given the budget situation, I think they're definitely supportable. The middle school and the high school, I understand the reductions in the classroom section at the elementary school and think that's very likely a landing place where those are gone, because of the things we talk about year after year of reducing enrollment, and eventually you have to cut a class. That's a reality. I don't think the STEM position should have been cut. I think that the SEL position last year was not nearly as effective as we would have liked. I don't have the contacts and the communication in Salisbury that other people at this table do, but from what I heard, the formatting this year was better. I still don't know if that trade-off in a budget year like this is, maybe that one makes more sense, that it wasn't providing the benefit and there was not a chance that it was going to provide the benefit that we're looking for, but maybe there was. So, I'm feeling more on my own, like that one is, I see more both sides of that one. The STEM one I can't sort of wrap my head around. Some of the other things I can see and understand and don't like, but I would like to see some options.
I understand. I want to thank Paul for eloquently putting out there exactly, probably how everybody in this room feels. The STEM position. The STEM position and the SEL position, I think were added when we had ESSER funds. I'm not quite sure that those two positions may have been added unless we had those ESSER funds. I'm a STEM person, so I know how deeply that STEM program is going to be missed by the students. But looking at a $3 million budget, we have to be realistic as to what it is that has to be cut in order to make sure that we continue to have growth for our students. This is a hard budget year, and, I mean, no one in this room wants anything remotely what's on this piece of paper right here. But I know that the principals as well as the administration has really looked deeply at a lot of these cuts. And we can say we want the STEM teacher back, we want the SEL back, we want programming for the high school. But we also have to be realistic of that number. I know that the 3 towns will be coming. If that number, as Paul said, if we want to keep everything in, if that number gets to 4 million, 5 million, there's no way that our towns are going to support it.
Can I just clarify? So STEM and SEL positions were not added with ESSER. So they were added in the COVID years when ESSER was creating some comfort, if you
Right.
will, where we had savings for bus runs and positions unfilled. But I just wanted to clarify that that was not ESSER funded. It was
That's what I mean, is we added those because we were comfortable, because we had ESSER funds for other things. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I'm just looking at trying to add this stuff back in, and this number going higher, that I know our towns will not support it.
So I will say this, right? It's January 17th, and this is the danger of doing this, right? In that normally you spend 3 nights hearing the needs, and then we get into the workshop where we say, okay, and here's the impact, here's the state figures, here's what this means on assessments. What do we want? Tell us a number we feel like we need to cut out, 700,000, and we come to you with cuts. So our process this year is entirely different, as we've discussed, by way of explaining the way we identified cuts. We, the central office crew, met with each of the principals individually and said, let's identify, let's set a target, a couple $100,000's worth of cuts. We didn't universally say each school has to cut 200,000, right? That there's nothing equitable there. This is where we landed based on individual conversations with principals. Again, the 3 elementary principals didn't say, ooh, pick my 6th grade, right? It was, if we have to cut something, what would we be, where would we start? And that felt like a logical starting point. So, and again, I said it earlier, I so appreciate what you said, but I feel like we have to come in with a number that's going to be supported, and we end up with a budget. I don't disagree with any of the concerns raised or the thoughts that were shared. I think they're spot on. I think there's unless we're talking about saving by shifting 40,000 for medical plans over to the food services account, or even at the high school. I mean, I think, Patrick, if we were up here talking, there's a little more flexibility there with removing those sections, not a huge impact. When we start to talk about less class sections in any grade level, or outright offerings like STEM or SEL, and they weren't the ideal setup, right? The 3 elementary principals did come in here and say, yes, we each want one of each. And we landed with 2 positions shared between the 3 schools rather than 6 positions. We still would like the 6 positions, absolutely. There would be incredible impact. I just don't know how that happens. So I guess what I would say is, I think we jumped and by design, jumped quickly into driving that number down. That's not something that has to happen tonight or next week. We can come back to you next week with the bottom line, kind of above the cut bottom line of 3.4 million and what that would mean. Because again, we will have a little more clarity about medical benefits, and we will have firm numbers from the state. And maybe some magic formula kicks in and we are getting $700,000 new dollars. Sorry, it's not even funny to joke. We likely will not get a whole lot more Chapter 70. Maybe we get 66,000. Maybe we get 120 if they do 60 per pupil. But we can net off of those. We'll have the foundation enrollments. We'll have the town-by-town calculation, and we can do several scenarios. We can show you the 3.479. We can show you the 2.613. We can show you 2 million, what that means to the assessments. And then we can start to have discussions about where we need to cut, where we need to refine. Is it different cuts? These plus, these minus. Not that this isn't good discussion, but I also don't want people to feel like we have to go out of here tonight having made any decisions.
And I do want to clarify, like, I don't think that this, I'm not saying in any of that I thought that this was unthoughtfully done. We always, I can understand every single cut that was made and why and how and all of that. But I guess it would be my preference to give the towns the opportunity to show that they support it. And I feel it incumbent to say that if they don't, we need to make it very clear they're not supporting what's needed. Because that is the simple truth.
Sorry, I didn't get a chance to speak before because I had to make a bathroom run. But I just want to say, I guess, in my mind, I think, having been through this process a few times, this is, in my mind, it's always buckets, right? It's not, is it real sitting on paper possibilities? Yes. But is it more buckets of kind of where we think costs are coming in and, where there's possibilities of things that could be reduced? I think they're going to move, right? There's going to be ongoing discussions. We're going to end up in likely a very, very different place from where we're at tonight. So I tend to not take any of this sort of as this is what's going to happen moving forward. I think we could add $10 million and still not have everything we need, but this is the reality that we live in. I don't think it's fair to go and say we need to add 3 or we're not doing our jobs, right? Our jobs are to do the best that we can, absolutely, the best that we can for our students within the structure that we exist in. And I think we're going to have to do that. I appreciate kind of where you landed as far as these numbers. I'll say as vice chair, I didn't see these up front. So I saw them the same time that everybody else did. I think that I always appreciate waiting until we have the state numbers before we get into any real strategic decisions, because depending on where you land, the strategies could be very, very different, right? It's depending on what happens with Chapter 70 or any of the other funding mechanisms. I know, we didn't know that the 9C cuts weren't coming when that news hit I don't know about you guys, but I saw 9C cuts, and I was checking the next morning to see, is it an education line that's getting hit? Because that could have hit us this year. Right? So, I guess we don't know what's going to happen, but looking forward to seeing those numbers. And then also understanding how the assessments are going to kind of shift out between the towns when we get those numbers as well is going to be impactful. And I think, at that point, I think that's when the strategy really kicks, that's when decisions are going to kick in for us. And you can make an informed decision rather than we're kind of laying out in paper the basics, a basic kind of idea of where we're starting. It can get into the details, I guess, of where that starts to go. So I guess overall, I don't like it. I don't like any of it. But I think, this document is a good starting point.
Is Is there anybody else who has any thoughts or questions? Go ahead. Paul.
So, Brian, we can all agree that the budget situation that we're in now is largely driven by the fixed costs of the teachers' negotiations contracts. And so we're not the only community dealing with this, okay? In point of fact, some communities were dealt much harsher numbers than what we're dealing with. And going forward, I want you to reach out to the superintendents that you talk to and try to get a sense of how they're dealing with similar situations. Not that they'll have a magic bullet, but
I can tell you we're scheduled to meet next Friday, the North Shore Superintendent's Roundtable, and OMI fiscal 25 budgets is literally as written an agenda item, because everyone's dealing, and again, when you look at the North Shore and you see some of, whether it's contract settlements or other impacts, special education out-of-district costs, right? The two big things are contract settlements and out-of-district costs. That is hitting everyone's budget in 3%, 5%, 7%, 15%, someone shared with me, massive increases in budgets. So I will have, not for next week, but the following week, I will have a much clearer sense on specifically how it's hitting other districts as well. But it's a good point, and I think also to note, none of this caught us by surprise, right? We knew coming in there were some other things that shifted, right? Special education costs, out of district costs, some other items, but those lines that are driving that personnel figure, we knew as we went in settling contracts, we were kicking some costs to this fiscal 25 because we had finalized last year's budget. So none of this came as a surprise from anything that we agreed and settled with any of the associations. And I want to be clear that we're not blaming or layering this on the back of any of the associations, and I know no one around this table is, but just to say publicly, we have some of the best educators in the industry, and we need to do everything we can to keep them. We're losing them, and it's we have to make sure that we're competitive. So nothing surprising, entirely frustrating on how we figure out how to deal with it, but nothing surprising, and I will get more information on that.
And so just to fill out the whole picture about the teacher negotiations, we worked really hard with the associations, and we all put our best efforts into it. But what was always in the background was we didn't want to be that district, okay, that was had disruption, that had strike, that had picketing, okay? That was never, in my mind, a possibility, okay? And the reason for that is because when that happens, in my opinion, learning stops. Okay, it's distracted and everything else. And so I credit our associations and the committee that negotiated this contract to avoid all that, continue learning, and we just have to deal with this. You know, it's just.
And right, so there's enough public now in negotiations and strikes that it's not speaking out of school, that there are, I will say over and over again, our associations, presidents and negotiations teams from specifically Unit A and B came to the table wanting to settle a contract, right? There are districts and associations that are coming to the table saying, my gosh, we can't wait to strike, and putting just ridiculous numbers on the table. And so, I mean, kudos to our association who came in and fought for what they deserve and what is justified, but did not ever come in, and never once did we ever get the sense that we need to get to this number or else. No one wanted that, and that is a unique place to be in this political climate. Our North Shore Roundtable, Superintendent's Roundtable, brought in 2 attorneys that have settled and worked on several of these negotiations, and my gosh, our teachers are awesome.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? I want to thank all the principals and administration. Thank you for coming, one of our selectmen. I know this is going to be a tough budget year, and I want to thank all of you for all the work that you do, and everyone around this table. It takes a village to do what we do, and we got great teachers, administrators, and I'm proud to be in this district for how hard everybody works. The next meeting is January 24th. Can I have did you have anything else?
I was just going to say, we'll come to you next week with more information, mostly updated any of these numbers that have shifted, as well as assessment information to be able to paint a picture, kind of the marker, and so that next week we can walk away with some targets set by you.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you, and have a nice night.